Job has been asking God to explain why all this trouble has come upon him, when he has always served God as best he can. He has done the things that God wanted him to do, and now he was in great agony and pain. And up until this point, God has been silent. God has not answered him. God has not given him an explanation. But when we come to Job chapter 38, God speaks. But God still doesn't give him an explanation. He just asks him a whole lot of questions. God spoke to Job in a whirlwind. Does this mean that as Job sat there with his friends, the whirlwind came up and Job began to see that there were so many things he just did not understand? God raised these matters with him, things concerning the nature of light, the water cycle, creation. Was Job there when God laid the foundations of the earth, when he created the deep and set boundaries for it? The physics behind these questions is still stretching the minds of scientists today to understand the nature of things. And so it's no wonder that God has not attempted to explain all of this to Job, for it would take many volumes. Rather, God has simply asked the questions. Can you bind the cluster of Pleiades or loose the belt of Orion? Can you bring out the constellations in its season? Do you guide the great bear with its cubs? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Can you set their dominion over the earth? In chapter 39, God continues, talking not so much about the physical universe, but about life on earth. Do you know the time when the wild mountain goats bear young? Or can you mark when the deer gives birth? Can you number the months that they fulfill? Or do you know the time when they bear young? They bow down, they bring forth their young, they deliver their offspring, their young ones are healthy, they grow strong with grain, they depart and do not return to them. Who set the wild donkey free? Who loosed the bonds of the onager, whose home I have made the wilderness, and the barren land his dwelling? He scorns the tumult of the city. He does not heed the shouts of the driver. The range of the mountains is his pasture, and he searches after every green thing. Will the wild ox be willing to serve you? Will he bed by your manger? Can you bind the wild ox in the furrow with ropes, or will he plough the valleys behind you? Will you trust him because his strength is great, or will you leave your labour to him? Will you trust him to bring home your grain and gather it to your threshing floor? The wings of the ostrich wave proudly, but are her wings and pinions like the kindly storks? For she leaves her eggs on the ground, and warms them in the dust. She forgets that a foot may crush them, or that a wild beast may break them. She treats her young harshly, as though they were not hers. Her labour is in vain, without concern, because God deprived her of wisdom, and did not endow her with understanding. When she lifts herself up on high, she scorns the horse and its rider. Have you given the horse strength? Have you clothed his neck with thunder? Can you frighten him like a locust? His majestic snorting strikes terror. He paws in the valley and rejoices in his strength. He gallops into the clash of arms. He mocks at fear and is not frightened, nor does he turn back from the sword. The quiver rattles against him, and glittering spear and javelin. He devours the distance with fierceness and rage, nor does he come to a halt because the trumpet has sounded. At the blast of the trumpet he says, "Aha!" He smells the battle from afar, the thunder of captains and shouting. Does the hawk fly by your wisdom and spread its wings toward the south? Does the eagle mount up at your command and make its nest on high? On the rock it dwells and resides, on the crag of the rock and the stronghold. From there it spies out the prey. Its eyes observe from afar. Its young ones suck up blood, and where the slain are, there it is. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me. as the Lord continues to question our understanding of nature and how things work. In Job chapter 39, why do they work? What makes them work? The instincts that God has put into individuals. He compares the ostrich, which doesn't care for its egg. It just leaves it lying on the ground, according to Job. And then you have the horse that races into battle and isn't turned back by the noise. As I read that, I'm reminded of the victory of Beersheba 100 years ago, when Australian light horse attacked Beersheba. And the horses just charged, presumably because they had the smell of water, and they overran the Turkish armies that resisted them, just as described here by Job. They galloped into the clash of arms. They were not frightened by the threat that lay ahead, and they gained great victory. Of course, we can go and research any one of these things, and the more that we research any of these topics, the more amazed we will be at the biology and the ecology, the operation, the fact that the system exists and works. When we look after animals, they get sick, but in nature they seem to thrive. God looks after them on the hills better than we can look after them in our barns. Why is it so? How is it so? Do we understand why it is so? So we research, so we study, so we observe, and we learn marvellous things in whatever area we focus our attention. And we can never get to the bottom of the wisdom of God. We have the oxen that will plough, but the wild ox won't obey us. Why the difference? How has God made one to cooperate with us and one not? But even so, we need to guide the ox. If it's going to plough our field or to pull our cart, we must tell it which field to plough. We must prepare the implement. We must prepare the yoke. We must prepare the cart. So it is that in our lives there are things that we can do, and God has given us instincts and abilities. But there are things that God does in the background, and it's not really our place to question what God is doing. It is our place to do what he sets before us to do each day. It's not that we shouldn't ask questions, but we shouldn't doubt God because we can't understand the answers. There are times in life when we can quiz our teachers and get an explanation that we can understand and follow. Most professional people can give an explanation as to why we should do a certain thing or not do a certain thing, and assuming that they are qualified and they know what they're talking about. If we follow their advice, we will be safe, whether we understand their advice or not. And so it is with God. Some things we can understand, but many things we can't understand. For the detail of the universe is beyond our comprehension, but it is all within the comprehension of our God. So, as Job observed the whirlwind and began to question why are things so, God asks him all these questions, and he realizes he doesn't have the answers, but God does. He doesn't know the reasons, but God does. He doesn't know the purposes, but God does. And so God has put into place a magnificent system. No wonder the angels, as they gather around the throne in Revelation chapter 4, declare, "You are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honour and power, for you created all things, and by your will they exist and were created. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come."